So we are happy to answer any questions that you have, or as much as that of listening to your thoughts about how we should be thinking about freight as we move further into the 21st century. Yes, sir.
Yes, you described your intent to try to introduce innovations into the freight network in Chicago. What are some of the possible areas of innovation you see are viable at this point in time, and what might be emerging in the future?
Yeah, I think that when we look at what are some of the innovation needs, it starts in information. We're finding that so much change is coming in how goods are tracked, in how shipments are tracked, and how drivers are tracked. And it's making the business much more efficient. So I guess I would start by saying that we're seeing a lot of opportunity to continue to grow in that area. The second piece of innovation that I think is going to be critical is how we maneuver goods within yards. The biggest problem that we have really in metropolitan Chicago, and when we talk about that 2 days being in Chicago, it's moving from rail yard to truck, or rail yard to rail yard, or truck yard to truck yard for that matter. We've got to find ways to do that more efficiently. That's going to help as much as Create will help in a lot of ways. I think we need to find new ways to put some emphasis and some money into how we move goods inside of yards. So, off the top of my head, those are a couple of the key places that I think we should be starting. We've got some really young, new businesses that have grown here in metropolitan Chicago that are looking at some of these issues, and I think there's real opportunity. I am afraid that again, when we talk about the investments that the Memphises or the Kansas Cities are making, they're also making investments in innovation and in research. And so I would also say that we've got to figure out how to fund some of that, and as much as funding it, how to encourage it. To a certain extent in the Midwest, my feeling is we've lost a little bit of our innovative mojo. We've forgotten that we led, really here in the Midwest, the last two economic changes that happened prior to Silicon Valley. And we've got to get back to that. We've got to get back to where it's all right to fail again. That it's the Silicon Valley solution of fail quickly and move on. We fail quickly and it's a front page story, and we've got to get out of it. So it's encouragement as much as funding of a real new entrepreneurial attitude that I think is going to help the freight industry. Yeah.
Thank you for that great presentation, and Annie, thank you very much for for showcasing the MetroPulse. I just want to point out that Annie is a graduate of our program, from our program, and doing great things. So just to inspire the students in the audience. So I'm not a freight expert, so maybe this is a stupid question, but it seems to me that if my widget moves more efficiently from New York to LA, let's say, and avoids, we end up sort of solving the sort of bottleneck problem that is Chicago, that the main beneficiaries of that are going to be the consumers, me. If the corporations who would profit from having their goods move more smoothly and more quickly across the country should care to share those, to pass on those benefits to the consumer. Otherwise, the companies make more money. I'm wondering sort of, in what sense is Chicago a beneficiary of getting rid of this bottleneck? In what ways do we benefit from solving this problem? Because it seems like, I'm just wondering, maybe this is, or this struck me as maybe counterintuitive, but are we in some ways benefiting from this lack of efficiency? Is one of the reasons why we have so many jobs in the freight industry, because it takes 2 days.
Because they don't do it very well?
And if we make it more efficient, does Chicago lose in that? It seems like the main beneficiary should be paying to remove the bottleneck, but that is a national, global, actually, consumer market, and a global sort of landscape of corporations who in some ways should be paying for this. What's Chicago's incentive to try to eliminate or lessen that bottleneck effect?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And we to use a similar analogy is we do almost as much manufacturing in this region as we did 30 years ago. It's just we employ a lot less people because we've gotten incredibly more efficient at it. Efficiencies, can mean lower workforce, but it can also mean the fact that we get more activity because we do it more efficiently. And I think that's got to be the goal. For metropolitan Chicago, one of the major reasons is that we have unbelievable traffic congestion that's caused by freight. We are, who knows, it depends on the study you read, first, second, third most congested region in the country. Right next door here, the Circle Interchange was a month ago said it was the biggest freight bottleneck in the United States. I think that when we talk about rail and rail delay and separating communities, and there are real issues that are dealt with in that way. But I think the benefits of more efficient freight movement is that ultimately we have less traffic congestion and we have less noise and pollution impacts on our communities. We have to always be mindful, I think, of the job issues, and I think that our feeling is if we create a stronger economic climate for freight, ultimately we create more and better jobs here in metropolitan Chicago. Yeah.
Hi, Steve. Kazuya, Randy, how are you? I think Kazuya said it best when he said that you don't give yourself enough praise, and I'm just going to give our audience a little example. In Will County, we are the busiest inland intermodal port in the country. Ports are bounded by 55 on the west and 53 on the east, going on Route 53. We've been working very closely with CMAP. They helped us secure a unified work program grant to do some planning along that corridor, and they have continually supported us with staff support. John O'Neill another month has been coming to all of our meetings and stuff. And I think that's maybe what some of the people in this room need to realize, that CMAP has made fantastic strides under Randy's leadership to do a lot more of this outreach. In Will County, we're the Netherlands. We're way out there. We're out there. It's cold and rainy and everything else. And they've made great strides to come out, really support and realize this gem of opportunity we have, this economic engine, really help us try to figure out what to do with it. Because it wasn't brought here by planning, it was brought here by business. And now we're, I don't want to say stuck with it, but trying to figure out. So I just got to give Randy and his group some praise for continuing to help. And I think the room needs to realize that some of the outreach goes out.
Well, yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. But I think Will County is a good example of you can let things happen to you, or you can plan for them. And to a certain extent, it grew. The freight industry and the logistics industry grew too fast for Will County. And it's not that we don't want the jobs there, and it's not that we don't want to make that an intermodal port. We do. But we created how many thousands of square feet off of Arsenal Road that was built for horses and buggies. We need to think about this in a more proactive way, and that's what this plan is trying to do. That's what Go to 2040 talks about, and that's what as a staff. And so I appreciate him saying the staff work. That's what we're trying to do, is get out and work with people who are facing these challenges and trying to help them think through it. Not the way necessarily we want them to do it, but what makes sense for them inside this big regional metropolitan picture. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about freight's connection to air quality? I know that CMAP's been sort of on the forefront of funding some cleanup projects of switch engines here in the local yards. But it seems to me without some sort of national policy that you'd hoped to have, it's hard to expedite the turnover of some of these aging diesel fleets if they're going across the country.
I think that when we talk about, and I said a little bit about that in what are the benefits to metropolitan Chicago of a more efficient freight system, part of it is air quality. There's no question. There's a couple of sides of this. Rail transportation is much more efficient from an air quality standpoint than trucks, and so we ought to again figure out what is the best mechanism to move goods, and we need to figure that out. We need to turn the fleets over. There's no question about that. We put some pretty significant CMAC money, one of our federal funding sources that we control, into retrofitting engines, and we will continue to do so. We think it's really, really important. But the other gets back to yards. How much activity in yards, and where do we need to go electric, and where do we need to go to low emissions vehicles in the yards, and there are places doing a much better job of that than us. So it's certainly an issue. It's certainly one that we've tried to be involved in, and it's one where we are certainly not a leader, and we need to get on the stick a little bit. Yeah.
Do you see impacts, environmental impacts of developing intermodals and the freight system as a hurdle to development in the development of the overall freight system? If you take an intermodal, you need a lot of real estate. It's largely impervious, or a container yard. Environmentalists don't like that. A lot of times these are sited on farmland, good land, that somebody else has earmarked for a prairie restoration, etc. For example, down near Arsenal Road is the Mateo and Tallgrass Prairie. So do you see those issues being a hurdle to the development of freight?
Certainly there are conflicts. And it is, again, when we talk about doing real cost-benefit analysis for whether it's infrastructure improvements or development projects, I think we need to look at them in a much bigger way than just the dollars and cents part of cost-benefit. We need to look at what are the environmental costs, what are the natural resource issues that have to be dealt with. And we need to cite them wisely. And we haven't always done that. But I guess the bottom line is that for freight to be more efficient, sometimes it's going to take bigger pieces of property. And we need to find a way where, in this case, railroads and trucking companies go back to becoming good neighbors. And I think they're trying. I think they're not done, but I think they're trying to become good neighbors again. And understanding that they have a role to play in the community. That it's not just they're plopping down their yard or their intermodal site to move goods, that they're a part of a community and they're impacting that community, and how can we do it in ways that make sense. I think it's an inherent conflict when you're taking large pieces of land that need to be in areas that are either farmland or other kinds of natural resources areas. You're always going to have that conflict, and so we've got to cite them wisely. We've got to do the best environmental we can, and we've got to become good neighbors. Yeah.
And mine is a related question around, let's say, for example, neighborhoods or communities, because you mentioned earlier a priority was how do issues around freight affect local communities? So what are maybe some of the planning or neighborhood issues that may come up as we're trying to improve the system?
Yeah, when we talk, and we talk a lot as a staff about this issue of how much freight is enough, and how many trains running through a community is too many, and how many trucks running through my neighborhood are causing a problem. There are real issues at the community level. I think that as a industry, we've tended to ignore them. The railroads often say we were here first, and you built around us, and there's some truth to that. But the fact is that whatever it is, when you're increasing the kind of freight activity it has impact on our communities. When I was in Springfield for years, and the train tracks ran right behind my house. So, I got used to it eventually. I knew it when I moved there, but that doesn't mean there wasn't an impact. It didn't mean that I had to be careful where my children played. It didn't mean that I didn't have to think about, where I need to go in an emergency because I can't do that. I can't get across this. I think that it's the industry thinking about and not just recognizing, but understanding the impacts that they're causing, and understanding that they have to be part of the solution. And that's where we're really trying to go with this. We're not saying less is better. We're saying we have to be good neighbors. Yeah.
You mentioned the regional freight authority and the need for a regional freight authority. If that's not a new agency, do you have any insight into where would be a good candidate or what that would look like?
My board would like me to say CMAP, but I'm not sure that's true. I think that there are places. I wouldn't necessarily care if it was a state authority, if it was under the state DOT, if it was structured correctly. If the RTA was the right place to think multimodally. As far as collecting revenue, which is what they do today, providing financial oversight, which is what they do today, that could make some sense. What we don't want is we've already have too many agencies that get their own little piece of the pie, and they program their dollars, and there's no real coordination amongst them. We don't need to do that again. Worst comes to worst, I guess you could do something like that. But I think that we need to find a regional way to do it. The governor just signed a bill to allow the tollway to build rail. Maybe they're the ones. I don't know. At this point, we haven't said what that right thing is. We've said we're open to things that make sense, and our preference is to not create something new. Yeah.
How have the economic downturn and things like the buy local movement affected the demand for freight?
Freight. There are people that will have more details than me about this, but the freight. There's no question. Freight growth is not what it was going to be before the downturn. We're seeing some of that, but I don't think anybody believes that's going to last. The railroads, for decades and decades and decades, they made money by cutting costs. Now we're making money by providing more and better service, and I think we'll get back to that. And so I think it's a dip. I think it's been, it's flattened out over the last few years, but I don't think anybody questions whether it's coming back. Yeah.
You talked about Chicago as the bottleneck, and in certain terms, certain segments of the rail are worse bottlenecks than others. So I'm thinking around Porter. It sounds like you've been in discussions with the CN, and what is the talk around actually separating the rail from passenger?
That's a really good question, because again, this plan talks a little bit out of both sides of its mouth. We say we want to increase public transit and we want to increase rail activity, and they're using the same rails for the most part, and so we've got to. It is a concern. The problem with most of our rail system, our passenger rail system, is that there's not a lot of right-of-way left where we could actually add new rail. And so again, it's how do we put the most trains out there in the most efficient way. I think we're a little unique. I mean, we have problems. I'm not going to say we don't. But Metro, for example, runs pretty on time for as much as it has to share its tracks with freight. They've got really good agreements with the freight railroads. They work well together. We need to continue to do that. But we call for doubling the use of public transit in this region. And so it's a real concern for us about how we provide enough space to make that happen. Some things like CREATE will help, but they won't solve it. So it's a really key issue for us that I have to be honest, we're not there yet. Yeah.
How much gas and oil is coming through this region?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, do you?
You don't. I don't know the off the top of my head, but it's high.
Do you?
No, I don't know.
Mike?
No, I don't.
Do you, Ann?
No, because it doesn't actually comes. Most of it comes from Canada, but it comes from the West Coast.
Well, there's a lot that's coming out of Western North Dakota, for example.
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot. That's.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. I want to get back to, I don't know where it started, but when we talk about federal investment in rail in particular, and I tell this story all the time that why we need to have a federal policy and federal investment strategy as much as a policy on freight is, we tend at the federal level to spend tens and hundreds of millions of dollars double tracking or improving access for trains in West Virginia so they can sit in Chicago. How does that make any sense to anybody? And it shouldn't be just Chicago's problem to fix it. It really is a national issue, and we need to have a national investment strategy to fix it. We should pay for part of it. But we are, our saying is that, when Chicago gets the sniffles, the system gets a cold. And that's really the way it works. So, we're very committed to trying to figure out an investment strategy that really focuses on national priorities. And again, not spreading the money around so that every congressional district gets a little piece. Mike?
Okay, just a question about how you think more holistically about freight and other forms of transportation, density, housing, and land use. How does the freight element fit in with the transportation use? You're talking about a question about neighborhoods. So how many cars are too many to go through a neighborhood? And I'm thinking, what kind of a neighborhood are we thinking of, and what kind of a neighborhood is CMAP trying to promote?
Yeah, we talk significantly about more compact development. We talk about the development, particularly suburban development, that we saw 10 years previously as kind of being dead. That you're always going to have big square foot homes, but it's not what people want anymore. People are looking for a new kind of development, a new kind of land use. Our communities are as much of a problem in allowing that as it is, developers and home builders building it, and so we've got to get around that. Transportation is such a key to that. We have to provide good transportation choices in order to make more compact development work. We've got to make our communities more walkable. We've got to make it easier to get around without owning a car. And in all honesty, when you get cars off the road, you make more room for trucks. And we've got to think about it a little bit in that way. That if we're going to double the amount of trucks on our system because that's what drives our economy, then somehow we have to reduce the number of cars that are on that road. And that means smarter development. It means better land use decisions. We talked a lot in the plan, and I didn't want to necessarily go all the way into this, but we talked a lot to a lot of people that said, I'm willing to talk about a different kind of a home and a different kind of a situation. But there are certain things I need. I need to have options to get around. I need to have a park that's close, that's safe, that's convenient for my children to play in if I'm not going to have a half-acre backyard. If I'm not going to have my own swing set, I've got to have one that's close for my kids to swing on. And so we've got to think about how we provide the kind of amenities that makes transit work, that makes more compact development work. And when we talk about that, we're not talking about our whole region looking like downtown Chicago. It's got to make sense. But we also got to talk in our suburban areas about how we make downtowns work again. What makes people want to stay and live there and not just get off the train and pick up their dry cleaning and go home. It has to be those kinds of things that make a new kind of development work. We talk about new downtowns that, in all honesty, look a lot like old downtowns. And that's really where our focus is trying to be. Yeah.
Does your freight plan address pipelines?
It does not. And that's a really good question. And I will tell you that it probably should. There are certain things that we haven't addressed in infrastructure, pipelines being one of them, broadband being another, that we really don't address as an agency. And I can't tell you why, except that maybe we don't have expertise, and two, we don't have enough people. But I think when we talk about pipelines, when we talk about moving goods and product, we probably should be talking about pipelines, and we don't. Fair criticism. Yeah.
I was gonna, along those lines, is water transportation sort of declining in your view? Is it still going to be an integral part of the freight system in the future?
There are certainly parts of this country that it already is. There's parts of the state that it already is. The Mississippi River moves a lot of goods. And again, we go back to what's the most appropriate thing to be on a barge or to be in the belly of a ship or to be, what's the most efficient way to move goods? The water transportation system is significantly underutilized. No question about it. We have, in Illinois, ignored the infrastructure. Our locks and dams are in actually incredibly poor condition. The State Chamber of Commerce has a whole committee that's just dealing with this. It's such a problem. So I think there's potential. At the end of the day, it's still going to be a relatively small piece of goods movement, but I think we've got to take advantage of it where we can. And I think that's going to, again, not only take some infrastructure investment, it's going to take some new thinking. The governor and the mayor are trying to make the Port of Chicago active again, doing something other than managing a golf course. And so I think they're on the right track, but it's going to take some time, and they've got to commit to it. There has to be a real commitment to making that port district work. Yeah.
So back to the question then of revenue, which you emphasized is something we need to be thinking about in creative and new and creative ways. So if we aren't going to be able to finance things the way we have in the past, if you can talk a little bit more about some of your thoughts about what these public-private partnerships might look like, and what are some other innovative structures for developing revenue streams?
Yeah, when I talk about public-private partnerships, I don't talk about them in the same way that maybe some others do. And particularly when they talk about transportation public-private partnerships, they talk about leasing a facility for 75 years, and that's not the way we think about it. We think about it as a public investment that leverages private dollars, and that's how we ought to be thinking about it. That there should be some public. That there's public responsibility, there's private responsibility, there's public and private reward, and that the public investment leverages private dollars into the system. We don't do that very well here in this country. We go one way or the other. It's a private investment or it's a public investment in infrastructure, and we need to find ways to combine that. I think that we're not going to do it, but I think a good example of that could have been Western access to O'Hare and the O'Hare bypass. There was a couple $100 million of public money that was set aside by Congress that could have leveraged maybe our first real public-private partnership in a highway project. And then there is, and then we're concerned about in a straight private where the control is, how the costs rise, what does the lease look like. Here, there's a little more control, so we think there's that. On innovative financing, we are committed as an agency to congestion pricing. To pricing our facilities based on use and based on need. We have an incredible public investment in our transportation, and honestly, you can take the same to water and sewer, but we'll talk about transportation. In our transportation infrastructure, that we don't charge for based on its value, and that doesn't make any sense to me. You charge more for your air conditioning when it's hot outside. And it reduces use in some ways. So it's a managing of a facility, it's a managing of a function, but it's also changing behavior, and we think that's the plus in both. We think there are revenues to be made from doing this. We think it makes sense. I personally believe, if a reporter was here, I would deny it, but for all of you, I personally believe that all of our interstates in the next 30 or 40 years will be tolled. I don't think that the federal government and the state government are going to be able to afford to maintain them, and the only way we're going to do it is to toll them. I think that we have to think about that differential between freight movement and passenger movement on those facilities. What's fair? How much damage is being called versus how much economic opportunity? How much use? We've got to think about those things. But we really believe that pricing is the solution, not only for revenue, but also for the kind of behavior change that will give us at least less congestion. We're never going to be without congestion in this region. If we are, it means we don't have any jobs, and we don't want to get there. But at least to keep things reasonable, I think the only way to do it is to see behavior change. And honestly, the only thing people react to is cost. Great. Well, I thank you.
No, thank you. We want to please join me in thanking Rand.